everybody, to the launch of the Supply Chain Sustainability Schools Performance through Procurement program launch. I'm Sean McCarthy, I chair the Supply Chain School, and I'm delighted to be here today. I was a procurement professional long before I was a sustainability professional, so procurement is very much in my DNA. I was delighted to have the opportunity to lead this program of work funded by CITB, with an objective to improve the skills of procurement in the construction sector, which is a massive challenge and a huge piece of work. What you're going to see today is phase one. So we've got some new content up on the website for you. We've got a self-assessment. We've got all sorts of exciting stuff. As we move into phase two of the program, we will be rolling out some instructor-led workshops. There will also be an opportunity for partners of the school to bid for some consultancy support to develop some specific procurement improvement projects, so we can really demonstrate how better procurement can add value to our industry, not just about price, about a total concept of value across the piece. So I'm very excited today to launch today's content. We've got some fantastic speakers for you, so please do stay with us. Couple of housekeeping things to start with. We're on Zoom webinars today, which is the big webinar platform. We do have a huge audience, so we have had to mute your microphones and switch off your cameras. But you can use the Q&A function on Zoom to ask any questions or make any comments. Please use Q&A and not the chat function. I know normally on Zoom you might be used to using chat, but please do use the Q&A function. And please participate, get involved, give us your feedback, tell us what you think, ask questions. We've got a great group of people here who will be able to answer for you and hopefully give you the information you need. We will be running a poll on something called Menti, and I'll explain that in a moment. I'll ask you to get on Menti now, and then we're going to do a big bold experiment a little bit later to try and understand the current state of procurement skills in the sector from those on the call. We don't have many slides today. It's not going to be a very slide heavy session, but we will distribute the slides after the meeting. We're also going to record the session, and that will be available on the Supply Chain School website after today's event. So if some of your colleagues have missed it, then they will have an opportunity to take a look at the event after we put it up on the website. So this is the agenda for today. I'm going to do a quick introduction. Here I am. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Helen Carter, who's going to talk about the programme of work and what we've done so far and how much we've achieved. Then we're handing over to Antoinette, who's going to talk about in a little bit more detail actually what's available on the website and how do you access it and how do you get best value from it. Then, as I say, we're going to do a big Menti poll, and what we're going to do there is we're going to offer a cut down version of the skills assessment, the training needs analysis that we've made available on the website, so you can give it a try. So we'll ask you to use Menti to vote on it, so we can take a look at, in today's audience, what's the current state of play in terms of procurement skills. So a bit of fun, but it should enable you to actually start to understand where you are in procurement skills and what that training needs analysis might do for you and for your organization. We'll take a short break then. I usually find 5-minute breaks aren't quite enough, so we'll break for around about 10 minutes. And then please do come back, because we've got a fantastic panel then of the partners that have helped us to put this together from scratch. So we've got Duncan Brock from CIPS, we've got David Hawkins from the Institute of Collaborative Working, Daria Baram from King's College London, who've made a great contribution to the process. And then finally, Dale Turner, the Procurement Director from Skanska. And Dale is going to wrap things up in terms of what good procurement looks like and how all of this fits together. We'll take questions, as I say, questions on the Q&A as we go through. We'll attempt to answer as many as we can. If we can't answer them all, then we'd be very happy to get back to you with responses. So that's today's agenda. What I will ask you to do now is, can you please get on your phones, get on a tablet, another device, or another tab in your browser, go to menti.com and put in the code that you see on the screen. I think my colleague Rosie is going to add the code and the link to the chat as well. So when we get onto Menti, you're ready for it. We will remind you again when we get onto the Menti poll, but if you do it now, then that prevents a lot of faffing around when we actually get to the poll and you haven't got quite on and, oh, I haven't answered the first question, because I've been there and I'm sure you have as well. So try and go on to Menti now if you can, preferably on another device. You don't need to do anything at this moment in time other than to get on the poll. So the questions aren't open yet, but at least it gives you the opportunity to start the poll so you're ready when we get there. Okay, that's it for me by way of introduction. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'm going to hand over to Helen, who's going to talk to you about the programme of work so far. Helen.
Thanks, Sean. Morning, everybody. It is morning. It's not lunchtime yet. It feels like we've been up already. My name's Helen Carter. I work with Sean and the team within Action Sustainability in the Supply Chain School. Like Sean, I am procurement by trade, have been since I left university a very long time ago, but obviously looking at sustainable procurement as well in more recent times, but incredibly passionate about procurement and supply chains, particularly in construction. So what I'm going to give you is an overview of how the project is working and what we've done so far, so that I can very seamlessly, hopefully, pass you over to Antoinette, who will show you the practicalities of how it's all going to work. So what is this? The programme itself is very simple. How do we get better at procurement, and how do we make sure that we're improving productivity and performance through better procurement in construction? So this project started, God, it seems like a lifetime ago, 18 months ago probably is when it sort of kicked off. We had this little thing called a pandemic in the middle of it all that sort of scuppered our plans a little bit in how we were going to crack on with it with regards to funding, but fundamentally the school and the partners were so passionate about this so that even when we decided that we were struggling with the funding, with CIPS being the main funding partner for this, we would carry on regardless, because it needed to happen. So over the last sort of 12 months, we've been working really hard on trying to understand how we can basically upskill procurement. Now, when I say the word procurement, what we're talking about from the moment you know you need it to the disposal point at the end and everything in between. So whilst we are talking to buyers, to sourcing managers, to people who do category management, we are talking to you, but we're also talking to the likes of the engineers and the construction managers. Anybody who's involved in the procurement process has been included in how we are looking to upskill our industry. So the idea and the aim of the project is to actually increase the quality of procurement training, procurement skills in our industry, and then be able to apply that practically into procurement activities on projects and frameworks. And we'll explain how that's going to work a little bit later on. To do that, what we've done is produced a series of tools and materials. So I always liken it to an elevator. I'm sounding very American, or to a lift, an escalator, whichever one you want to use. But fundamentally, we have produced a series of 8 e-learning modules that range from the real fundamental of what the heck is procurement, because personal experiences, people still don't really understand what it is and how it applies to a construction project and how it can actually deliver a lot of benefits. So we've got the real baseline of what is it, why is it important, how does it benefit us? Then we have a series of modules that look specifically at what we buy in construction. We are slightly different, I hate to admit, than maybe some of the other industries because of the complexity of our supply chains and the way that we operate. So we have a number of modules that we're looking at, things like how do we deal with plants, how do we deal with subcontracts, how do we deal with materials, and that goes into the real practicalities of what do we do to procure these days in those areas. And it does have issues around what is value, what is a good return, thinking about obviously a changing landscape now from cheapest price to best value. modules that go into that space as well. So how do we get into contract management? How do we get into managing our supply chain, working with them? And then we get into the final aspects, which is really sort of like the creme de la creme, if you like, the real best practice, which is the sort of collaborative working arrangements that we're starting to see emerge, particularly in infrastructure. We're starting to see it in things like the highways contracts, where we're looking at partnerships and we're looking at alliances and we're looking at collaborative working, which is where we've got some brilliant partners that we're working with. So those are out there. Actually, I'll show you what we're doing within that space. To build on that, we're complementing it with workshops. So the idea being that obviously if you do the e-learning module, there will be workshops on top of that, then really help you explore the issues that are within those. As in with most things, it's a project, it's funded, it has targets. So over the next 2 years, we have a huge number of targets that we have to achieve. We have to achieve £5.5 million worth of savings for you guys. I can imagine your ears popping up right now, through things like our supply chain improvement projects. This material being part of that support program, and I'll go into that in a moment. But we also have targets in terms of numbers of learners. So we have to reach out to at least 550 people amongst the supply chain within those projects. And within the school, the way we do our normal training, that you've seen us probably doing normal training, we have to reach out to about 600 of you, if not more. I mean, I'm all for conquering the world. I'm quite happy to beat those targets. But anybody who wants the training, we can go into that space. So obviously the training is part of that. We have the targets to achieve. The last two things then that really help with this are what we call the competency tool. So again, Antoinette will go through that a little bit later on in terms of understanding your own current knowledge of procurement, and then being able to tailor your training needs to your current level. So not everyone has to start at the beginning. If you understand the basics, great, you can get in higher. And then finally, we have a performance tool. We've created a series of metrics that's going to help us actually be able to evidence those savings, evidence the benefits, evidence the value that we're going to be able to bring through these supply chain improvement projects. We have 11 supply chain improvement projects that we have to support over this 2-year period. We are just putting the processes together on how that's going to happen, and we have a lunch and learn on the 17th of May, which is going to really go through how you apply to become part of one of those projects. And in there you get support from a consultancy perspective, fully paid. You don't have to pay for that. You get support in terms of training and workshops. So there's a little package we're putting together, so look out for that on the 17th of May. Finally, one of the things that it's important to understand is that we are not a siloed industry, although sometimes we operate that way. And procurement has become a hot topic, a huge hot topic. People are starting to realise the challenges we have now with supply chains. And whilst this project's been going on, there are other projects happening in this space. Procuring for value. We've seen obviously procurement being mentioned in the construction playbook. We started to see it, obviously Duncan's on the call from CIPS. We're looking at things like the Grenfell report. So we haven't done this in isolation. We have been working with CIPS, with King's College, all of who you're going to hear from, the Collaborative Institute for Working, and we've had one eye on those particular initiatives as well. So the idea being that we will be making sure that all the content links in nicely to help you guys understand how to navigate this particularly interesting world when it comes to procurement at the moment. So that's what we're doing. Basically, how do we procure better? How are we smarter? And how can we evidence the benefits of better procurement and supply chain management? Tools are available, and we will go through all of those in a little bit more detail, and you'll hear from some of the stakeholders on why this is becoming so important. That's it from me. I had 5 minutes. I shall now pass over to Sean.
Okay, thanks very much, Helen. We did promise you a fairly slide light session, so thanks for speaking without slides. I know Antoinette next has got some slides to take you through the website in a little bit more detail. So hopefully that's given you an overview of what we've done so far and what we plan to do. So I'm going to hand over to Antoinette now, who's going to take you through actually what's available. It's available on the school website today. To talk you through what you can actually get and what you can benefit from. Antoinette, over to you.
Thank you. I'll just set the screen. There we go. Good morning, everybody. As I've been introduced, I'm Antoinette Irving. I've had the pleasure, I am still the project manager for the Performance Through Procurement programme. So here it is. Welcome to the new topic, procurement. We've been working on this for the last 12 months in developing the content, so it's great to see it now live and available. So to access the new page, if you head to the school's website at the top there, if you head to topics, it highlights down at the bottom, procurement is now part of the topics that are now available. There you will see a number of different topics that we have been covering. This is from procurement for beginners, procurement for professionals, supplier relationship management, and collaborative construction procurement. So I'm going to take you through this page. This is the procurement for beginners page. This is to highlight what you will typically find from top to bottom in all of the key topic pages. So just to highlight, there's a number of videos, but for each topic, there will be a specific video relating to the content. We also have a number of resources available. So we have a resource library with over 100 forms of resources, from presentations, documentations, additional videos freely available. And depending on what page you are visiting, for example, we are on the Procurement for Beginners page, it will link to other relevant key topic pages for easy access. So as mentioned, we have a number of e-learning modules across all of the topics freely available, and they are all CPD accredited. When you've completed an e-learning module and have achieved an 80% or higher pass rate, you will be awarded a CPD accredited certificate, and your Supply Chain Storm personal account will be logged as this activity. Our panelists joining us later have played a huge part in designing all the e-learning modules, so a huge thank you to them for their support. So there are 8 e-learning modules, and I'll take you through what's then available through the procurement page. So we have one here for the beginners. It's called Introduction to Procurement. Then we move on to Procurement for Professionals, which is delivering cost and value in your plant and material procurement. And then there's one delivering cost and value in your subcontracts as procurement. We also go through to Supplier Relationship Performance Management. So we have a module listed as that. And there's also one about supplier performance, measurement and management. And then finally, we have a series of e-learning modules for the collaboration construction procurement. And the idea is that you would kind of start from 1, 2, and 3, and then finish off with a quiz at the end to get that accreditation. So the first module here is about the collaborative construction procurement, which then leads on to creating and supporting a collaborative culture. And then finally, part of that series is choosing and using the right contracts and digital technology to support collaborative procurement, and then you will take the quiz. You might have noticed at the end of each of the modules, it highlights the different states of competencies. So it's from beginners, intermediate and advanced, and also the suggested duration. As we come to the bottom of the topic page, you can see here that there's an opportunity to assess your company against the supply chain score and industry. On completion, you'll receive a chart that's similar to this here that shows your company score, which will be also available as a report. And then when we head back up to the page, I kind of skipped back and forth, but when you go back to the top of the page, you can take a self-assessment. And again, on completion, you'll be able to view your scoring and receive an action plan. So that will then recommend a number of resources and learning for you to explore. So that's kind of a whistle-stop tour of what the new procurement page looks like. Sean, I'll stop sharing now and I'll hand over to you because I know you're going to speak a bit more in regards to self-assessments, but also to highlight, and what Helen did touch on, there's a number of workshops, webinars, conferences that will be taking place over the next 2 years. So again, these are all advertised on the website. Thank you, Sean.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Antoinette. So if I'm just going to share again very briefly, because what we're going to do now is something a little bit more adventurous. Bear with me a mo. Okay, so what Antoinette has mentioned the training needs assessment. So you can self-assess your procurement skills on the website. What we're going to do now is to have a bit of fun. We're going to use Menti. We've replicated that assessment in Menti, and we're going to ask you all to get on to menti.com and enter the code if you haven't already done so. My colleague Anoki is going to share her screen. We're going to take you through the poll in a live environment and see what sort of answers we get. So do bear with us if it all goes wrong and crashes and burns, but we're going to give it a try. So Anoki, would you like to share your screen? I'll start taking you through the questions. Okay, so Anoki, is the poll open now? Can people see the questions? I guess they can because we're getting answers coming up already,
Yeah.
which often happens. Okay, so the first subject is leadership. You can see here the responses on a maturity matrix on a level 1 to 5. In all of these things, of course, you're not necessarily aiming for 5. We've got 29 people so far have said they've got limited understanding of procurement leadership. That might be fine. You might just buy stuff, and procurement leadership means nothing to you. On the other end of the scale, we've got 8 people who think they understand how to drive best practice in procurement across the sector and can demonstrate benefits. So up at level 5, we're looking for people with skills not just on one project or not necessarily just with one business, but actually can work across the sector and to help the industry to improve generally. So interesting spread here. You know, quite a lot of people displaying relatively low levels of knowledge, which is why we're here. But do bear in mind what you'll need to do when you do these self-assessments, when you actually go online and do it properly. You need to think about what level you aspire to. And if you're doing something like this as part of a personal development plan, then do have a conversation with your management about what level they expect you to get to. Can we move on to the next question then, please, Anoki? Okay, so the next one is about collaboration. I suspect everybody collaborates in some way or another, just simply using personal relationships. There is an ISO standard, ISO 44001, for collaborative working, which you'll be hearing from David Hawkins later, who's a great champion of that standard. And how can you implement collaborative working processes, including the standard? We don't seem to be getting any responses through, so I'm not sure whether the poll's working. Okay, they're coming through now. Excellent. Thanks, Anoki. Okay, this is interesting. As you can see on the screen there, the big pink bar at the second level. I have a basic understanding of formal collaboration with suppliers, clients, and professional advisors. This is, you'll be hearing from David later, so I'm not going to steal his thunder, but I think the sort of, you know, back in the 80s when I was a young buyer, you know, the days when you were the master and the supplier was the slave have long since gone. And understanding how we can work together to mutual benefit. A lot of the programs of work that Helen described, so, you know, the Value Toolkit, the Construction Playbook, Project 13, going all the way back to the Latham Report and the Egan Report and Mark Farmer's report more recently. It's all about how can we actually integrate the sector in a much better way. So one of the things we are offering is to help to build skills around collaborative working, and it looks from this little snapshot that we have here today that that may be needed. Okay, let's move on to the next question, and I won't panic when the scores don't appear straight away. I'll just talk for a few minutes. Innovation. So there are ways of encouraging innovation through procurement, and a lot of people see procurement as a barrier to innovation. So you do hear, well, you know, we'd love to do something more imaginative, but the procurement rules won't allow it, or the procurement department don't let us. You know, we have to write a specification on precisely what we want and go out for 3 bids and choose the cheapest, because that's the way we've always done it. We're actually looking at things like outcome-based specifications, where we're describing what we want to try and achieve, can bring a lot more innovation through the process. However, the procurement skills needed to evaluate offers of that type are much more nuanced and much more complex than maybe a simple, here's a precise specification of exactly what we want, give me a price, get on with the job, and I move on to the next procurement. So once again, one of the things we need to try and do is to bust that myth and to help procurement to be an enabler for an innovation rather than a blocker, as it's sometimes perceived to be. So again, the skills level generally to the left-hand side there. Some people claiming very high skills in this area, which is brilliant. Those of you that do believe that you have good skills in this area, we may well get in touch with you. If you go online and do the self-assessment, if you are scoring highly, can you help us? The school is very much about iterative learning. So can you provide a case study? Can you provide a video? Can you help us to run a workshop? It's not all about a kind of teacher and pupil relationship in the school. We're very much a collaboration. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Thanks to so many of you for participating, by the way. The numbers coming up are looking really good. We've got over 200 people on the call. And many of you have come to play with this, so that's fantastic. I was thinking we might get about 3 responses or something. So, okay, so this is about understanding the business need. It's the first stage, really, of any procurement or sourcing process. In many cases, again, if you just buy stuff and you're just told what to buy and you get on and buy it, you wouldn't necessarily have an understanding of the business need. Although for me, a good procurement professional should understand what we're trying to achieve through our procurement and should be in a position to challenge that need if necessary. I always say that the cheapest thing you ever buy and the most sustainable thing you ever buy is the thing you don't buy at all. So ask yourselves the question, do you really need it? And for me, a procurement professional very much has a role and should be empowered to be able to do that. Okay, this is a much more even spread of responses. I guess those of you in the procurement profession are quite well versed in doing this, and as we go through, we'll be kind of taking you through the procurement process. So it'd be good to understand where the skills levels are. Okay, so let's move on to the next one, please. Value definition. Some of you may have heard of the Procuring for Value Toolkit. It's a relatively new initiative that's being rolled out at the moment, and we're in discussion with BRE, who are running this program of work. There may be some of you on the call today about how we can integrate this piece of work with the Value Toolkit. The Value Toolkit is a very good way of defining right from a very, very early stage in the procurement process, what is it we define as value in this particular piece of procurement, in this particular context, for this specific project, for this specific client. And then how do we take ourselves through an entire procurement cycle, as Helen described, you know, from the beginning right to the close of a subcontract or disposal of the product that we bought. How do we define value and how do we get it through the course of the program? Some of you may have heard the expression balanced scorecard. That's not new. It's something that's been around for a long, long time. Thinking about the various factors that come into play in our procurement, obviously price is one, but we're seeing increasingly more sophisticated procurers having much higher weighting factors against other definitions of value. Which might be about quality, it could be about sustainability, it might be about social value. There's a whole range of factors that we need to include in our procurement thinking. So slightly to the left here, interesting, because I think some of the work that we've done already in the e-learning modules that we've created, particularly the two procurement professionals for plant and materials and subcontracts, do go into this concept of value and how you get it in a great deal more detail. And my colleague Helen, that you've just heard from, has developed those two modules, working with partners at CIPS and various other partners in the school. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Develop a strategy and a plan. So having got some idea of what the need is and how we see value, now what's our plan for addressing the market? Is this something where, is it a fairly simple product where we might do something like an e-auction? Is it a really complex piece of procurement, maybe that needs some form of alliance contracting or collaborative procurement? What does the market look like out there, and how might we address it? How do we need to know more about the market before we go out to procurement, so we procure more effectively, we make ourselves attractive as a purchaser to those suppliers out there? I always say procurement is very much a two-way thing. As a buyer, we need to understand what value is to our suppliers as well. It's not just a one-way street. Okay, so a reasonably good spread of skills there, but in the majority at that level 2, I understand the value of procurement planning in driving better decisions, which is great. It's good to know that people have at least that level of awareness. Okay, shall we move on to the next question? Market analysis and supplier appraisal. This is something that is sometimes done really, really well. We have subject matter experts and category managers in our sector that really intimately understand their category, what suppliers are out there, who's available, what capacity they have, what sort of quality drivers there are, often internationally, obviously not just confined to the UK. Having a really good understanding of our market is really important, because we need to know who's out there selling stuff and where they are in their cycle of manufacture in order to get the best value. We're working at the moment with an organisation looking at why a number of suppliers on a framework are declining to tender, and the reason for that is that they're just too busy. It's very much a saturated market in this particular category at this moment in time. So we need to know that sort of thing in order to understand how we procure in a better way. Okay, so this is a much more even spread. So many of you do seem to understand, how to use balanced scorecards, evaluating the markets, evaluating the suppliers out there that can give you best value. Okay, so shall we move on to the next one? Supplier selection. This is how to pick the best supplier, basically. And it's, it goes on from, fairly basic, price, delivery and compliance with technical requirements. That's sort of where I started, really, I suppose, as a buyer in 1983 or whenever it was, a long time ago. On to understanding more about whole life costs, developing a balanced scorecard to assess the total value. I was deeply involved in the London 2012 Olympics programme. I chaired the independent sustainability board for that programme of work. And the ODA had a very sophisticated balanced scorecard where typically at least 60% of the weighting criteria were on non-price criteria. There was sustainability in there, there was delivery on time, there was quality, a whole range of things. Although, I do talk to clients still today that just look at price and that's it. We don't look at anything else other than the capital price of what we're buying, which in this day and age seems to be quite short-sighted. Okay, and at the higher levels of evaluation, we talk about collaborative working principles, understanding how, you know, the culture and how our suppliers might work with us in a better way. So a relatively low skill set across there. A lot of you in that pink bar at the second level. Once again, we've got some really good learning content that can maybe take you from that level up to the next level to understand maybe how we do things in a better way. Okay, the next question, please. Contract award. So this is about the forms of contracts that we can use. Many of you will be aware of the various, you know, JCT and all of those sort of forms of contracts that are out there, and how to use them. The higher levels, can we include key performance indicators in our contracts? Can we follow up and, as Helen said, move away from the sort of let and forget culture that sometimes we have in procurement, to hold our supply chain to account for delivering what they said they would deliver? Certainly my observation in the construction sector is that often doesn't happen. You know, suppliers can offer the moon on a stick in a tender, in the sure confidence that the client's never going to come back and check that they've actually delivered it. I've certainly seen examples in sustainability criteria where some contractors have done some wonderful submissions on their sustainability credentials, only to find that they hired a consultant to write the bid and then sack the consultant when they win the bid and carry on doing what they were doing before. So really understanding performance-based contracting, moving on up towards how do we contract for more collaborative techniques, and again looking at the standard for collaborative procurement. So a big block at the levels 1 to 3 there. So a lot of you are familiar with contracts and how to award them. I guess if this is a procurement audience, I wouldn't be surprised about that. Okay, shall we move on to the next question? Supplier development. This is what we do in the supply chain school. And we do what we do in the supply chain school because we believe that by coming together, partners in the school coming together to develop a more competent supply chain will lead to more competition. It leads to a better, more competitive, more competent pool of suppliers who can compete for work. So I think it's a very important factor. As I say, it's part of our DNA in the supply chain school, to try and upskill an entire sector. And you can only do that in collaboration. We have, I think, 125 partners now in the supply chain school who all contribute and all have a common interest in upskilling their supply chains. It's a really important factor in procurement generally, not just in sustainability, which is our our starting point in the supply chain school. So some high levels of knowledge there. It's good that there are 20 of you saying that you really understand how to involve your supply chains in continuous improvement, but a fairly large number of you that have very little knowledge in that area. There's lots of help available in the supply chain school to do this. This is why we exist, so we can certainly help to improve those skills in that area. Right, let's move on to the next question. Forms of contracts. So this is really understanding the forms of contracts that are out there, and you know, going further up the elevator, as Helen would describe it. Do I really understand how wider value can be delivered through forms of contract? So how smart am I in using the various forms of contract out there in order to drive a wider definition of value? Okay, so it's interesting to see we've got quite a lot of respondents in the blue bar there, which is interesting. Obviously, within the learning that we're offering, We do have a lot of content on the school now about these various standard forms of contract and how to use them, and that is included in our e-learning modules. So lots of opportunity there if you are voting in those lower two in the blue and the pink bars there, then there's lots of opportunity for you to learn. But equally, if you are evaluating yourself at the higher levels, then the sort of content that King's College have worked with us to develop, Professor David Mosey and his team, will be for you, and you'll be hearing from Daria later about those programs. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Supply relationship management. So this is a little bit more strategic, a bit longer term, thinking about how I prioritize my suppliers, and how I understand what levels of relationship I want with my suppliers. It can be quite informal, or it can be a very structured program of work to develop the relationships with those key suppliers that I have that are critical to my business. There's a whole e-learning package on that one. I wrote that one myself, so I hope you like it. Working with our friends at CIPS and Institute for Collaborative Working, etc. Very important that we develop those longer term relationships. And interesting, that the biggest vote there in the pink area is about having, informal networks, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you have a larger supply chain, and if your supply chain is critical to the delivery of your product or service, then you may want to look at developing relationships in a slightly more formal and structured way. Okay, so we'll move on to the next question. Supply performance management. So this is using key performance indicators, goals, targets, metrics, indicators to manage your supplier performance using fact. As Helen said, there is a let and forget culture in procurement generally, not just in construction. Very important, I think, to have proper data to understand whether our suppliers are actually doing what they said they would do, and to understand how we deal with those during a contract. I see a lot of examples of post-contract appraisals. Well, that's kind of very nice. We got to the end of a job and we think about how well the supplier did, and we may or may not include that in our procurement decisions going forward. But if there is poor performance, then it's too late to do anything about it. So that supplier wasn't very good, and we don't really understand why, but it wasn't very good. We'll try and do better next time. Much better to understand trends in performance during the course of a contract, so we can actually get in and solve those problems as we go through, rather than looking back at a contract and saying, we didn't do that very well, did we? How can we do it better next time? It's both of those things that we need to do. So supplier performance management is about during the course of a contract, not just at the end of a contract. Okay, so moving on, and again, there is a whole e-learning module on that, and I wrote that one as well. Collaborative procurement models. This is where we needed to bring our friends from King's College in to help us. So Professor David Mosey and Daria and the team have written 3 really excellent modules on collaborative procurement. I would commend them to you. Those of you that are interested at the higher end of Helen's elevator, that really want to understand how we can drive value in the longer term from some of these larger projects. It's a fantastic series of modules that they're available free of charge. I would certainly recommend that you give them a try. I'm not surprised that we're seeing relatively low levels of knowledge here around that. It's not for everybody. If you're a small business and you just need to buy some stuff to do what you do, then 3 collaborative procurement modules from King's College are not necessarily going to help you. But certainly if you are in a situation where you're working on projects with multiple contractors, multiple professional disciplines that need to work together to deliver better outcomes, I would certainly commend that module to you. Okay, so I think that's the end, isn't it, Anoki? If you want just to move on one more, but I think we're done. So thank you very much for that. If you'd like to stop sharing, Anoki, that will be great. Thanks. As I say, that was a bit of an experiment. We weren't quite sure how it was going to go. So thanks to all of you for participating. It's given us some idea of the skill levels in the industry. It is just a game at the moment. We've just been playing around with a poll. But do go on the website, do go in and do the self-assessment formally. What the system will do, if you do a self-assessment on the website using pretty much exactly the questions that you see there, the system will give you an action plan of 10 things to do. So straight away, you're on a learning pathway based on the levels of knowledge that you record today. So thank you for that. What we're going to do now is we are going to call a short break before we go over to the panel. So by my computer, it is 11:16 now. If I can ask you to come back, please, by 11:25, and then you'll be hearing from some of the partners that have actually helped us to develop this. You'll have the opportunity to ask them questions and to get involved. So please do stay with us, but I do realise we all get a bit zoomed out after a while. So we'll have a short break. If you can come back, please, at 11:25, and then we're on the panel discussion. Thank you. So far, we've had some questions being posted up on the Q&A, which my colleagues have been busy answering. So a couple of typical questions. Somebody's asked if we're going to run this session again. We aren't running the session again, but we are recording it, so anybody can pick it up after the event. There was also a question about the transferability of any CPD learning that you've done. It is possible on the school site now for you to transfer. If you move organisations, you can actually take your CPD record with you on the school. So there's a lot of really good functionality on the learning management system that enables us to do that. So what we're going to do now is have a bit of a discussion with the panel about procurement in construction, and why we should improve things and how we might improve things. So Duncan, if I can start with you. CIPS, the biggest institution of its type in the world. I know you've been doing some fantastic work in construction over the last couple of years. Would you like to talk about, from your perspective, the state of play in procurement skills in construction and how we might improve them?
Yeah, thank you, Sean, and it's great to have so many people joining the session today and showing the interest in procurement. I think Helen touched on it a bit earlier about the importance of procurement and the focus that needs to be on improving procurement skills. If I look at what's happened, particularly over the last 2 to 3 years, we have had a pandemic. We all know that the challenges that's caused us personally. But as through your supply chains, you've all had the same challenges. You've all had the issues associated with lockdowns, shortages, not being able to get the supplies that you need. And I think whenever I've spoken to anyone in the sector, quite a few people have been quite surprised how little they knew about their supply chains, when actually it came down to understanding what their suppliers were doing, where they were, where in the world they were, and then whether or not there was any issues associated with those. We've had this little thing called Brexit that's been bouncing around for the last so many years. But actually, while it's happened, and while we've got the new sort of customs controls in place, we know it is causing problems. We know it's causing delays. We know it's causing cost increases. And it is challenging people to look at whether or not they should be buying in different places in different ways across the sector. And then one of the things that I've been really focused on is the fallout from the Grenfell Tower disaster, the news that we keep hearing about poor commercial practices, poor procurement decisions that were taking place, poor management of the suppliers that led to a significant tragedy, but also a major impact due to poor commercial practices, people not doing things right in procurement. And I think therefore, when you look at everything to do with the need to improve procurement, it is because there's so much that you can do more and better and focus on to make your organizations improve. The one thing that's come through very clearly to me, though, as I've looked at more at the construction sector, is that everyone does procurement. And I think, Sean, you touched on it when we looked at the answers that we got from the poll a bit earlier. Everyone has a go. And I think in a way that's a part of the problem, but also, I suppose what we're doing here today is part of the solution is trying to build up everyone's skills. Because we're all a buyer. We all buy on our daily basis. We all think we know that we're really good at negotiating. But actually, when it comes down to doing good structured procurement and strategic procurement, and then managing the suppliers and contractors effectively, driving performance improvement all the way through, it isn't that easy. I think whenever the question set that we just went through earlier, I think very clearly you're starting to go, well, actually, I'm not quite sure about that bit. And I think when you look now at procurement generally, and particularly in this sector, there are so many things that you need to take into account. You need to be really good at looking at the issues associated with risks, with the resilience of your supply chain, whether you can get what you want when you want it, and the costs associated with getting it as you go through. Value for money will continue to be an important driver, but it's value for money, not squeezing the suppliers and squeezing the cash flow so that they end up cutting corners and causing problems associated with that. So getting really good value for money is essential for us. There is still and will continue to be a focus on ethics, on transparency, on driving out modern slavery, on looking at ways in which you can make sure your supply chain is clean of all those things as they go through. You need to drive sustainability, and obviously, Sean would be a great advocate of the fact that procurement and what you do with your supply chain would have a significant impact on your organisation's ability to be able to say we are driving sustainability forward. You need innovation from your supplier base. You need to develop your small suppliers, bring the SMEs up and through to the right skill set and capability. And I could probably add another 10 or 15 things that a procurement person should be able to do. And then when you think about that, you go, well, actually, you know what? I don't have the skills. And maybe when I'm doing procurement, I'm probably not doing it in the right way as I go forward. So we would look at it, and the reason why we've been very happy to support this initiative is that it's essential that we get those procurement skills embedded all the way down through the construction supply chain, not just at the clients, not just at the prime contractors, but actually getting everyone thinking more about what they buy, where they buy it from, how they buy it, and actually managing those supplier relationships in a way that really do drive the value and the innovation and the sustainability that we need from people, and not just squeeze, which is what some of the very poor commercial practices have been as we go through. So from a CIPS perspective, we would always encourage people to do CPD. We'd always encourage people to develop their skills. I've been qualified for a long time in procurement. I still learn every day about things to do better in procurement. And I think anyone who is either very seasoned professional or is just starting to look at this procurement thing, it's really important that you build up your skill set. Really important you focus on that. And then if you do start to get into this, you might realize that actually I do need to get more strategic procurement skills. I need to build on this foundation that I've got. And actually, clearly from the CIPS perspective, we'd be delighted that people would want to go forward and get fully qualified, to get to be a fully qualified professional who can really drive value through their organisations. But this is a great starting point. And I think it's really important that we'd encourage all of you to actually spend that time to invest in your own skills and invest in your own capabilities, because that will actually make a big impact as we go forward. So I think that's probably enough for me at the moment, Sean, but I'll be very happy as we go forward to pick up any further discussions from people as we go forward.
Thanks, Duncan. There's a couple of questions that I think might be good for you to answer on the Q&A. So there's a couple of open questions which are kind of CIPS and procurement profession related. If you'd like to respond to them, that would be great. I'm going to move on to David now. David, I had a genuine conversation only a few days ago about collaborative working, and the expression was, why do I need to collaborate? I just give the contractor a spec and I expect them to get on with it. That was a real comment that I heard, I think it was last week. How might you respond to that?
The first point,
what are the benefits of collaboration?
I'd say the first point I would make is I've heard that so many times before until it all goes wrong, and then people say, why didn't we collaborate? I guess from our perspective, I've been involved in procurement since the early 60s in construction. It has always had its challenges. It's a huge community of large and small organisations. You know, we don't just talk about the tier ones where my good friend Dale sits, but we go right down to tier 4, and you know, it's been in lack of integration and frequently very disjointed. Over what we see today, you know, projects are becoming more complex. There's need to bring these disparate entities together to address the many issues and experience. And, you know, you mentioned earlier on all the reports that have come out, but, you know, we need better outcomes. We need better time management, stronger budgets, more cohesion, risk, as Duncan was just saying, quality, sustainability, overall performance. You know, through integrating a common approach to collaborative working, it has been demonstrated that we can do better. We can deliver mutually beneficial outcomes. But first we need to understand and then embed collaborative working. And just got a little comment here. You know, I'm seeing collaboration pop up everywhere. In fact, you know, it's almost got to the point where collaboration's the answer. What was the question? And I think in the world of procurement, you know, at heart, I'm a procurement man. It isn't always necessary to get into a complex relationship for everything we do. So we need to be more acute at understanding when and where we and what we need to do. So I always put the word out, you know, collaboration without context is just an aspiration. Collaborative without setting expectations is wishful thinking. Collaborative behavior without definition has no measure of reality, and collaborative working without rules of engagement is simply going to end up in chaos. So, you know, from my perspective, I'm not a standards man, but I actually believe that the work that we've done over the last 15 years to put some rigor into this process is important. And it's useful at this point because I'm sure we've got lots of listeners online from small companies. Sometime this month, hopefully, we will be publishing a new addition to the suite of standards, ISO 44003, which is a principles-based guidance for small companies who think that collaboration is only something you do when you're a huge organization, but actually it has to permeate all the way through. And I think, you know, later on this year, we're going to be launching a scheme to help that. So you asked about benefits. What I go back to is some research that we did in conjunction with Warwick University. And we looked at senior executives in organizations. Why was collaboration important to you? And what was fascinating, and I think it picks up on something Duncan said, you know, when you list out the things that they were looking for, and this was across the UK, Europe, and the US, better problem solving, better reputation, customer satisfaction, increased trust, all of the, a whole string of things. And interestingly enough, right at the bottom was lower operating costs. And then when I say, offer that suggestion to procurement people, they say, yeah, but my boss just wants me to save money. So one of the things that I think we're missing is that we're not actually, you know, when you mentioned earlier on, I think when I started in procurement, price, quality and delivery, and if you got 2 out of 3, you were doing quite well. If we're going to become reliant on other organizations to deliver the outcomes we want, we have to start thinking much earlier in the process. So we have to start thinking about the business case. Why do we need collaboration to do what we need to do? Why is it important to the organization? All of the things that these executives identified will, of course, all drive lower cost. We spend huge amounts of money on lawyers, on time, fighting each other over disputes instead of sitting down around the table and working out a grown-up way to solve problems. So what we've recently seen is we published a document last month, Insight to the Future of Collaboration. Top of the list of that was a structured approach to collaboration. And one of the justifications for that was what we've seen over the last 15 months or so, is the fact that those organisations, large and small, that focused on their relationships, had built these sustainable relationships, were very quickly able to react to the challenges that the pandemic brought. Those that didn't found themselves struggling in a morass. So from my perspective, you know, structured collaboration, collaborative leadership, building trust, developing competencies, you know, we know collaboration makes sense. The challenge is, how do we make it part of business as usual? And I guess that's a challenge for all of us. And I go back to Duncan's comment, which I would endorse. When I started back in the 60s, it was called purchasing. We didn't have any view on what was upstream or downstream of what we did. And, you know, sometimes, and I hate to say this for procurement professionals, but some of the best procurement I've seen has been done by engineers who were made to understand the commercial implications of what they were doing. So, you know, from our perspective, yes, collaboration can add a lot, but I don't think we should get too fixated on it to the extent an exclusion of common sense. I don't know if that helps or hinders, but
Thank you. I think it helps a bit. It's really interesting, actually, because my first dip into procurement, I started life as an engineer. I joined Shell because Shell were looking for what they called technical buyers, and they were doing exactly what you described. They were taking engineering people and training them up on the commercial side. And that's how I got involved in procurement in the first place. But we won't dwell on that. We'll move over to Daria. Daria, you're part of Professor David Mosey's team that's helped us a great deal with the 3 modules on collaboration. Could you maybe pick up the thread of David's conversation and talk about how we can really weld this collaborative behavior into contractual conditions and how we make it work?
Yeah, no, that makes actually a lot of sense. I mean, Dave talked about the fact that projects and the process is getting more complex. He talked about the fact that we need structured approach to collaboration. So I suppose putting it into context, I think that would I'll probably start by just something very basic. We've got a process that moves and assembles materials and equipment and it into a kind of a completed and fully functional built form. But you can say that about any other manufacturing. The difference is that we actually build prototypes, we manufacture once and then we move on. So that's actually add to that, I suppose. The fact that each and every kind of project relies kind of heavily on a coordinated effort of a kind of a diverse range of people, products, services and works. And then that with a huge number of interconnected kind of delivery and payment processes. So you're beginning to see why, you know, as previous speakers keep reinforcing that we need to coordinate, we need to integrate, we need to collaborate. And so it becomes a kind of a no-brainer. So let's see kind of what role does a contract play in all of that, especially in particular construction contracts. And we all know and agree that it should set out all the rights, responsibilities and procedures. It should kind of identify, assign, and I suppose fairly allocate risks. But I think most importantly, it's about actually creating a planning tool that if this happened, we know possibly how to deal with or how to go about dealing with it. We were talking about, and the modules are about thinking about a more kind of collaborative procurement, collaborative construction. So there's a kind of a good comparison that I want to actually use from a kind of international construction law review that says a good contract is in essence is a kind of a handbook for performance. But a collaborative contract is not only a handbook for performance, but it also needs to incorporate and have within it the management and the integration, and that's required by everyone for the agreed activities that they need to take into consideration. So with that in mind, I suppose with the construction contracts, we've got the machinery that responds to the variables, say payments, change instructions, unforeseen matters that possibly have time and cost implications. But a collaborative contract, it needs to contain that machinery, the same machinery, but it also needs to have other features. It needs to have features like the ability to set up, coordinate and motivate that kind of collaborative working, because I think that's very important. It needs to have additional rules and procedures for other things if they happen and they're not in that contract to resolve these standard forms that we have. I think the timing of that kind of type of contract is important, because if it's done at more early and strategic and with more involvement of the sort of the whole supply chain, then you have a better risk of better opportunity to reduce risks, basically, and any surprises that might come about. So another would be, an obvious one would be to kind of a duty to act more fairly with each other. But I think most importantly, I would kind of say that it needs to create a mechanism that takes the necessary steps to avoid conflict in the first instance, rather than say, okay, if this is it, this is going to turn out to be, we don't have an answer, so let's have a dispute over it. Everyone talks about the fact that, okay, why do we need a contract for collaboration? Why don't we just use the trust? And of course, the charter with those wonderful photographs that they take usually at the start, with half those people are not really around when the project starts. But the problem with that is that you get misunderstandings if it's not written. If it's not written, how often do we come across people that decide, hang on a minute, I don't, total denial, I don't remember, basically, we talked about that. So they choose to forget what was agreed or what was decided, or going forward. And I think worse than all is kind of the fact that it will probably have a lack of willingness to share ideas and offer any kind of improvement, and kills innovation as its outset. So I've started, with that sort of complexity about integration, about coordination that we need. So we do need a kind of a formal agreement to create what I call a kind of a collaborative ecosystem. It's going to be a type of commercial kind of agreement that can support collaborative relationships and processes and combines those with agreed actions and rewards. So I suppose the short answer to your question is yes, we do need we don't need a kind of formal commercial agreement if we want that collaborative ecosystem.
Thank you very much, Daria. Our final speaker is Dale Turner, Procurement Director from Skanska. Dale, you deal with these issues all day, every day. Would you like to talk to us from a Skanska perspective, how you tackle some of these issues and how procurement skills are important to do so?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Really interesting just to hear some of the questions coming through, and obviously some of the other panelists as well. But I'm quite a simple person, and for my own organisation, and I'm sure it's the same for most others, 80% of our turnover is delivered through the supply chain. So, and I would say this, wouldn't I, because I'm a procurement director, but what can be more important than managing that in the right way? How you procure or manage that going forward. So that's my kind of outline statement from the start. And we've got procurement teams making fundamental business decisions every single day. So the way that we procure from a sustainability perspective needs to be right if we're going to deliver the solutions for our customers. So that's a major piece. And that even goes back to some of the things we talked about on the polls earlier on. Sometimes do we need to buy it at all, or can we find another way of doing it, or reuse something that we've already got? It's those kind of techniques that are there, and we need to make sure that there is competency and upskilling in all of the layers of the supply chain. And I think Duncan mentioned this quite a lot earlier on, in terms of when you're forced into some of the positions we have been over the last 12 months, you suddenly realise, do we really have a handle on where things are coming from? And you know, it's not just procuring something and then hoping it turns up on the day that they said it was. It's knowing in transit where it is at any point in time, and is it going to have a knock-on effect on a project for delivery. So there's all of that, but ultimately we're all trying to make things safer on our projects. We're trying to make things faster, lower cost, fewer resources. It all comes through procurement, really, doesn't it? And obviously data is becoming a big part of all of that now, in terms of what we need as the flow through the supply chain. And you know, you only have to see some of the recent press around some of the government procurement, which leaves a lot to be desired, around what happens if you get that wrong or are seen to be doing it not in the right way. And then of course you've got the wider piece, which is around client and stakeholder engagement. So you only have to see things that are coming out of the construction playbook, which I think is really positive, and around what is now required, not only at main contractor level, but down through the supply chain. So we have to show what our supply chain are doing. Duncan mentioned Grenfell and competency coming out of that, which is really, really important. And ultimately, it's just having all of the tiers of the supply chain, for me, aligned. So anything in all of this content, if this brings the baseline up, which I'm sure it will do, I think that's a big thing going forward, because it's about consistency up and down the tiers. So are we doing the same things with the good practice all the way through the board, rather than it just sitting at client or main contractor level? And we know that there are supply chain partners of ours that are doing things better than we are, and you know, we want to hear about that best practice, and if we can broaden that or share that with everybody else in industry, then we all improve, don't we? Certainly a big push at the moment on visibility of supply chains. We talked about modern slavery and understanding the supply chain, but knowing where the pinch points are, and knowing for where the problems might come. And we know this is ever changing. So if you look at what the landscape's going to be like in the next 5 to 10 years, it's only going to be more onerous. Our clients are only going to be asking for more, certainly in the public sector, where it's taxpayers' money. They want to know how we're procuring and to best value, and making sure that we are getting that best value down through the supply chain, and people aren't taking the mick at certain stages. We've all, everybody's got carbon reduction targets, net zero. That all needs to be procured in the right way to achieve that. Social value is a big area, so we need to make sure that's put in there. And you know, payment, which is very topical at the moment, in terms of how the tiers of the supply chain get paid on time in line with terms and conditions, and just making sure that they are still here on the other side. It's been a tough 12 months, and we need to help the supply chain out and make sure we're doing our bit, because we'll need them on the other side. So that's just a bit of a flavour, I think, of where I think the landscape is, and I just think it's only going to get tougher in what's expected going forward, and procurement's going to be fundamental to all of that. So onwards and upwards.
Thanks very much, Dale. There's been a few questions popping up in the Q&A, and thanks for those panelists who have been diligently answering them. There was one that came up that struck me about this whole concept of collaborative working. And the comment was, you know, that these expressions, collaboration, have been kind of used and abused in the past in an industry where, you know, traditionally those in lower tiers of the supply chain haven't been treated very well. And thanks to the correspondent who wrote that for putting it very politely, because I could use possibly far less polite words. How do we bust this myth? What you know, that we've had loads of goes at this. I mean, I was shocked to see that I was at the launch of the Latham report, and it was 25 years ago when a lot of this stuff was being advocated, but still we have this practice of just, you know, passing the risk down the supply chain to the organization that's least able to bear it. What do we do to kind of break that perception that collaboration is just a word, and we carry on doing what we've always done. Happy for anybody to pick that one up. How about you, Dale? Why don't we start with Dale?
It's a big old question there, Sean. I'm not sure we've got time to
no, we probably haven't.
This really, but I think the question is absolutely fair. I think in terms of it's been very hit and miss. I think one of the things we probably need to understand is what we can collaborate on and what we can't collaborate on. I think there's quite a bit of negativity and risk averseness, if that's a word, around its competitive advantage and why would we want to give anybody else an inkling in that. But I think what we've seen within the supply chain school is if you put all of that to one side, put your organizations to one side, what can be achieved going forward. So I think we need a bit more of that, really. There are things that will still be a competitive advantage for organizations and they won't want to share. But, even if you look at something like data at the moment, we are going to all have to share data in some way, shape or form going forward if it's all going to work. So we got to get over the kind of legals around this and the, I don't want to share that piece. And then everything else hopefully will open up and flow from there. Not the whole answer, but a view.
No. Okay, thank you. I guess maybe bring David into this discussion as well. And also thinking about the pandemic, I guess the impression that I have is maybe the pandemic has helped us to put aside some of those competitive instincts and say we're kind of all in this together. And then there's potentially the even bigger threat of climate change, where the world really does need to come together. Dave, do you suggest a shifting of attitudes, or are we still back in the 60s when you started?
Well, I've personally got my fingers crossed. I think we've learned a lot of lessons in the last sort of 12, 15 months. The sad part about it is, and I've seen this over the years, I mean, the oil industry, you mentioned Shell back in the 70s, 80s, they were at the cutting edge of doing things differently. And then oil prices went up and bad behaviours crept back in again. I think there's a whole spectrum of things. I was challenged a little while ago over this, with the Latham report. I mean, Sir Michael Latham was PSL's chairman when we started. So, there's nothing in there we haven't learned before, that we haven't been round. What we have to do is move it from this concept of purely that the relationships are individual. It's not a relationship between individuals within an organization. It's actually about the integrity of the organization. And I think all of the things that have been talked about are important. I mean, Dara talks about contracts, but experience suggests that we've written contracts for the last 100 years on the basis of contracting for failure. We write contracts to hold people's feet to the fire when it goes wrong. We don't actually read them and say, is this going to help us deliver what we want? I think terms like collaboration have been overly abused, to the extent that I think people are now using it without even considering what it means. They just think it's a good buzzword to use. Some discipline and rigor has to go into it. And that rigor has to cascade down through the supply chain. So, and I do think, one of the things that always has stepped into my mind was, we didn't start talking about things like partnering and collaboration and alliancing until we'd actually selected the lowest price we could get from a contractor, and then start thinking about how do we do it. We have to move the goalposts way back up the system and start thinking about, can we deliver the outcomes that we've agreed to or we aim to without collaboration? And then you set a different dynamic into the whole development process. You start looking at suppliers because they are collaborative, not adding that as a bolt on at some point in the future. So I think there's a chance for us. I've seen some tremendous examples in the last 12 months of organisations who've been able to respond, but whether they'll do that in the future depends on the pressures they get, and a lot of that comes down to leadership. I mean, it's great to have people like Dale who believe in it. You know, you talk about sustainability. You know, I look at cases of sustainability and say, you know, if we only collaborated, we'd do much better. It's no good having a zero carbon policy if you're making your suppliers drive 500 miles around the country to do stuff and to come to meetings. You know, shifting it to somebody else in the same way as Duncan mentioned risk earlier on, you know, risk should be handled by the people best qualified to do it, not necessarily just passed on. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have to get to is, you know, Dara talked about a collaborative environment or ecosystem. I can't remember the term you used. That's what we need to create. But we also need to create that in a position of trust and transparency. You know, there's no good telling a tier 3 contractor they've got to be collaborative if you just walk all over them. And actually, you know, conflict, I'm actually a great advocate of conflict. One of the things we have to learn is how to use conflict as a catalyst for improvement, not as a personal hammer to beat people. So, you know,
excellent. Thanks a lot, David. Yeah, so we've got a question. I see Dale's typing an answer to it at the moment. So maybe if I can ask Duncan to talk to it. There's a question about the potential tension between collaboration as a long-term investment and then this push towards local supply, which is coming particularly from public sector clients, but also sometimes from site. You know, and it kind of plays into a little bit of what David was saying as well about there are potential benefits from local supply chains, but then of course in the construction sector where we move from one site to another, so local change is on every project, and that potentially then stops us from having these longer term relationships because every time we need to pick up a new local supply chain. Duncan, do you have any thoughts on that?
That's not unique to construction, but it is quite unique to the project environment that we're in. And I think it is an interesting approach that whenever you look at any procurement organisation, any of us who are professionals, that segmentation of your spend and looking at where you have that long-term strategic relationship with a supplier that will be there on every project, and therefore you need to have that sort of relationship because you're not going to be able to find the local suppliers versus those where actually you've got to build that supplier base every time you go somewhere else and set it up. And I think the two aren't mutually exclusive, I don't think, Sean. I think there is a case of looking at your spend profile, looking at where you're going to be spending your money and agreeing where you do need the long-term strategic relationships to continue because they are essential for you. They've probably got something that's unique, something that's different, some sort of maybe core materials that you can't get from anywhere else versus those where you actually need to build the local supplier base as well. I think it's interesting. I was speaking to a global CPO who's got exactly the same challenge of where do you source globally and where do you source locally for your various production plants, and it's been the same for a long time. So I think the two can go hand in hand. You've got to decide where you put your investment of your time and effort into. So where is it that you're actually going to build that relationship that will last project to project to project? Where do you actually then go and find and build that local supplier base? Right. And we have to do both. The skill set actually is the interesting one because I think that's the point that says if you're really good at driving collaborative relationships forward, you might not be the best person to go and find the new suppliers every time. And sometimes we've got different skill sets. And when you look at any approach to procurement, I think you need to look at the different skills you need to be able to do it effectively for the project. Where do you go to the market and find new, or where do you actually have the people who are really good at building and maintaining and driving that relationship forward? And they are different skills, and they're not always in one person. And I think maybe that's something that you've got to reflect as well.
Yeah,
that's a really good point. Yeah, David.
I was just going to jump in there and say, yeah, I think there's another aspect to that, and that comes through with some of the stuff that we've been looking at through this initiative, and that is, you know, on the one hand, you've got the strategic relationships, which I agree with, but on the other hand, it's about building the cultures within the organisation so that when you do go into those local communities, you go in with the right persona, shall we say. You're going to get the best reaction if you've got the right people doing that. So it's not just about having a complex relationship, it's also about having and embedding those different behaviors, which, you know, sadly have been encouraged. You know, I picked up a slide some time ago about the world, what was it, the human being's most destructive behaviors. And then when I looked back in my career and figured that some of those attributes were things that were career enhancing capabilities. So we have to change that as well as doing it. And I think, you know, organizations, those that have the power to lead, also need to be quite rigorous about their organizations. You know, do we tolerate bad behaviors because they get results? And if we do, then we're undermining the ethos that we're trying to create.
Yeah, thank you. Some really good points there, and just to emphasise on Duncan's point about different skill sets, where you know, the conversation has drifted a lot towards collaboration and collaborative techniques, but Duncan has quite correctly pointed out that it's not always the right approach.
No.
You know, if you're buying a traded commodity, it's all about price and it's all about position in the market. And you know, I used to buy electricity for a living, an awful lot of it, and there's no collaboration there. That's just about that's economics. It's about you know, taking a position in the market for a commodity, and that requires a very, very different skill set to the sort of thing that Daria was talking about earlier. We've had a couple of questions around what I would say is due diligence and this whole issue of contractors or suppliers promising the moon on a stick, employing professional bid writers that write lovely flowery commitments and then never actually deliver what they say they would, and potentially the lack of capacity to be able to follow up on some of those things and to really understand. I think there was somebody kindly from the audience put a response on to say that you really do need to go and look under the hood rather than just sitting in a room and evaluating tenders. Dale, would you like to maybe pick up on that in terms of, you know, how do you at Skanska deal with those sorts of issues?
Yeah, I mean, it is resource intensive, I have to say, but I mean, that's all part of good due diligence, I think. A lot of it to me, and I think I put a note back on this, was around just making sure that you have the level of, I call it a balanced scorecard approach, where you can break down individual elements in a little bit more than you would do normally, so that there are weightings associated with those factors, and therefore you can pick out you know, some more absolutes around who's providing what and who's not. You're right, you know, I'm sure people can go out there and wordsmith what they like, but you know, you're looking at past performance as well. You're looking at, I think somebody mentioned it, going and seeing something that's already out there, might even be a project that's up and running, and seeing whether what somebody is saying is actually the truth. But there are a number of different things that you would do as you go through the normal kind of PQQ, pre-tender, tender inquiry stages to try and tease out who's telling the truth and who's not. But I think there was another point around quality versus cost, and often everybody gets scored the same for the quality section, lo and behold, and then it's back down to cost again. But for me, that's about breakdown of scoring. You know, we've seen a start, I think, with social value saying that 10% weighting has got to be attributed to it. I was part of a working group that were looking at that before it came through on a public procurement note, and I said it needs to be a lot more than 10%. Otherwise it's not really going to have an impact on what the outcome is. So but you could attribute that to everything, whether it be carbon or anything else.
Okay, thanks very much, Dale. I'm conscious that Duncan needs to leave in a few minutes, so I guess we need to try and wrap the session up. Thanks very much to the panelists. I mean, I'm sure that, and there's lots of comments coming through in the Q&A, and some of those kind of, you know, talking about some of the challenges of getting people to work together and doing fair evaluations and working with suppliers and due diligence and all of those things, which is kind of interesting, and it's why we're here, and it's why we're doing what we're doing and offering the training that we're offering, because clearly a number of people out there in the world have got some quite significant challenges to face. So yeah, I think it's obviously that really just underlines the value of what we're trying to do today. As a final point, Rosie, are you going to put the link to the feedback in the chat? So my colleague Rosie is on the call. We do ask you for your feedback on everything that we do in Supply Chain School, because obviously that helps us to get better. We've already had some very good feedback, David, to you. A brilliant point from David about behaviours. Thank you, from Catherine Loudon. So so you've got at least one supporter out there, Dave.
Great.
Okay, so Rosie has popped a link to the feedback in the chat. So please do go there and give us your feedback. It's really important to us that we understand what we're doing, how well we're doing it, how we can do things better for you. We're coming to the end of our session now, but this is very much the beginning of the programme of work, as Helen and Antoinette and some of the others have said. What you've seen today is the result of around about a year and a half's work by some really good and dedicated people that are on the call today, and some that aren't on the call today. We've got a whole new topic area in the school, a new self-assessment. We've got 8 new e-learning modules. We've got a performance management tool that can be used. I would emphasize once again, because I always say this in the Supply Chain School, everything we deliver is free at the point of use. We will not ask for money for any of this content that we're providing, but we will ask you to invest your time in learning. And that's, you know, we're able to deliver this free thanks to, in the case of this program, funding from CITB, and also financial support from what's now 125 partners, including Dale and his team at Skanska, but including many others. So do take advantage. This is a free shot at some learning. We will be going forward over the next 2 years to deliver workshops, to deliver supply chain improvement projects, and we will obviously be feeding back to all of you as we go through that process. So do go to the school website, log on, get involved, do your self-assessment, give some of the learning a try. Please do, once again, reminder, send us your feedback. So thanks to all of the panelists, all of the speakers today. Thanks to over 200 of you that turned up on the call and gave us an hour and a half of your time, or just over an hour and a half, to understand what we're trying to do. And we look forward to keeping in touch with you. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks very much.